energy storage, energy transformation, renewables. Together, we can add 5% of the GDP value to the Polish economy in 2035. What we need to do is we need to think of how to provide those jobs when the transformation comes, because obviously an electric vehicle has 20% of the parts of a conventional vehicle, so there's going to be a little bit less engineering work around car making. I think the idea to make this value chain internal in the European Union is an excellent idea, because the European Union is actually quite small compared to these other global powers.
Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Business Focus program. Today, my guest is Aleksander Rajch, member of the board of New Mobility Association.
Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon. Poland becomes a hub for the electric vehicle battery production. So it seems that we are second in the world. It seems that lithium-ion batteries already account for over 2.4% of our country's total export, which is quite significant, and it's growing. But on the other hand, there are also some regulations on the European level which may change the situation, and this is also something that we will discuss. But of course, I think I have to ask the first question, because I think even last year or a few years ago we were talking about e-mobility. Now it's new mobility. So I think it's worth to maybe start with the definition of what has made this change and what does it exactly mean.
We're not talking about electromobility anymore. You know, 1.5 years ago, nearly 2 years ago, we published a report where we showed that if we drive all of those businesses around electromobility, so energy storage, energy transformation, renewables, together, we can add 5% of the GDP value to the Polish economy in 2035. And this is also how we thought about it, that we need to start working towards new mobility, an ecosystem, and not just a powertrain. So it's definitely that. And on top of this, today, we also talk about mobility exclusion. Some people can't access the newest innovation in mobility because they live outside of cities, they live in rural areas. So that's one point, but also the actual urban areas where we want less cars and definitely less personal passenger cars. We want more shared cars, maybe autonomous in the future, but definitely rail solutions, trams, and of course, getting on bicycles and being healthy. So it's new mobility, it's an ecosystem.
Because we want to believe that Poland has this competitive advantage. What's more in it?
The potential is huge. And as I said, we can generate 5% of GDP, but this is not something that is guaranteed. There's a lot of work to be done. The problem is we have 400,000 people employed in the automotive industry. And this, I think, proportion is similar for Central Eastern Europe. Of course, it's smaller for other economies, but it's similar in terms of the proportion. But what we need to do is we need to think of how to provide those jobs when the transformation comes, because obviously an electric vehicle has 20% of the parts of a conventional vehicle. So there's going to be a little bit less engineering work around car making. But you have batteries, you have charging infrastructure, various areas. And I think this is something that should be pursued. The challenge here is that the battery industry is no longer just the battery industry. It's also what happens before. So the extraction of critical raw materials, and we have corresponding law to that in the European Union now. And then, of course, you have the whole value chain that you want to keep carbon free, and you want to have the traceability of what's going on before the battery. So you want to know what the even employment conditions are in mines and in various other installations. And this is important in the European battery regulation. Then what's crucial is what happens after, so recycling and second life. And this is all a value chain that not only Poland, but Central Eastern Europe has a chance to become a kind of power hub in terms of the European Union, to develop competitiveness and really drive forward. But we have to seize the moment and start really doing that, attracting foreign investment, mainly from Asia, but also developing our own capabilities. And then on top of this, as you said, the heavy-duty vehicle industry, the TSL sector, 7% of our GDP, 700,000 people employed in this sector. This is even a greater opportunity and risk if we don't do it right. Most people today already know, expecting these really huge subsidy mechanisms to deploy in Poland. In Q4 of this year, we're probably going to see 2 billion zlotys, so 400 million euros roughly, for charging infrastructure dedicated for heavy-duty vehicles. And then we're going to see the deployment of 1 billion zlotys, so 200 million euros for actual vehicles. Charging infrastructure, what's interesting is that these subsidies are planned, so this is not something that has been already launched. That's still being discussed, the European Union with the European Investment Bank. But the ramification of these programs are rational in our assessment, and we see that they want to be as close to AFIR targets as it can be. And so this is I think, a very good approach. We saw in Germany with the huge growth of the fleets of electric heavy-duty vehicles that subsidies are the tool that kickstart the market.
If we talk about private cars, it was also incentives for the consumers. So where we are with it in Poland?
The My EV program was very successful. That is the first program for passenger vehicle acquisition, and light delivery vehicle as well were included in that. It's been very successful. We have around 600, nearly 3,000 passenger battery electric vehicles, a total of nearly 70,000 electric vehicles in total, because the delivery vans that are counted usually outside of this number. So 63 passenger vehicles, personal vehicles, and out of that, clearly 1/3 have been added with the My EV program. I think that shows the efficiency of the program, which realistically was deployed at the beginning of 2022, because it took nearly half a year to get all the formalities in place between the national fund and the banks, and that whole process to kind of be ready to serve the people who wanted to buy electric vehicles. We're also seeing that the uptake of electric vehicles and zero-emission vehicles is going to spike probably next year quite intensively. We hope to reach about 10% by a couple of years. It's 10 to 12% is the European average. We still have a 4% saturation of new vehicle registrations. That is low. So of course it's good for the EV users, because we can use bus lanes and we can park in urban areas for free, which is fun. That's another good incentive. I think an important impulse that we need to balance the subsidies and the incentives that support the uptake of electric fleets. And then in the end also make it a little less attractive to buy internal combustion engine.
I'm wondering, whether it's, you would say that it's more about competition or cooperation with the CE. We also know that, for example, Hungary is very successful in attracting Chinese investors.
On one hand, you have the Asian players coming into Europe, and you have the EU regulation that is clearly aiming at creating an internal kind of value cycle of all these products related to zero-emission transport, with, of course, the UK and Norway, but that's obvious. And, this is a natural step. So I think everyone talks about the Asian players, and we can come back to that. But you have the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's also the US that really took a lot of investment away from Europe. I think the idea to make this value chain internal in the European Union is an excellent idea, because the European Union is actually quite small compared to these other global powers. And so,
but has a huge consumer power.
Precisely. So, but keeping those resources, those critical raw materials in circulation is very good. And you mentioned Hungary. Yes, that's why I said we have a chance of being a power hub as a region. And so Poland and Hungary play the key roles here. And Hungary probably will overtake our position in batteries, for example. But it's the CATL investment, the BYD investment that I think you're referring to is important. But they also have investments from Korean companies, Samsung and SK Innovation. So there's a lot of activity there. However, these are investments that are being planned. Not all of them have been deployed yet. So we'll see how that goes. These players from abroad, from outside of Europe, they have to understand that the competition here is more difficult because of even our climate regulations that make it a little more difficult, because you need the proper energy mix, you need to look at your emissions, you need to look at where you take things from. I mentioned traceability, very important in Europe right now. Most regions still in the world don't have such strict regulations. And so it's a little difficult for European players to compete with global powers, because to put it frankly, it's harder for them, the conditions they do business in.
And speaking about the regulations, of course, some of them push the development, but you recently have signed a document a little bit with the critics of the recent ideas also on the European level, which actually may a little bit stop or block the development of the battery production in Poland?
It's constructive criticism, I would call it that, because it's basically aimed at the fact that we're all trying to pursue climate neutrality the same. There are historical factors that are, well, we don't have any influence over them, that make Poland and Central Eastern Europe very, very dependent on coal. We all know this. We have a lot of coal in our energy mix. And some of the delegated acts of the European battery regulation do stipulate a little bit of a difficult situation for those countries that would have a higher coal proportion in their energy mix. So this is something we reacted to, because it's highly related that you try to drive zero emission technologies by also supporting investments coming into certain areas. And if we're saying we're playing it all together as the European Union, then sometimes we have to disregard that we have our own economic interest, right? And I understand it's difficult for Western and Northern European countries to constantly do so, but that's the only way we can play together. So obviously there are countries that have an energy mix that is zero emission nearly fully. We know which countries these are, and for them it would be easy, and they are also competing for the battery investment-related projects. So that's a little bit of a difficult situation. But as we said as PSNM, last year during our New Mobility Congress, we published what we call the 7 for electromobility. So 7 very strategic recommendations that address charging infrastructure, logistics, Poland as a production hub, so these investments, support mechanisms, so all these things we're talking about here, but also those 2 elements related to R&D. And R&D in our part of the world is mostly related to big funding projects, but we have to concentrate on delivering efficient solutions, and that's the R&D we need. So not just an abundance of ideas, which is always also good, but we also need to focus on delivering those ideas so they can hit the road and they can actually get innovation into the technological ecosystem. So this is what we really need, and I think that will close the loop. But that's why we address it, that it's all a comprehensive system. And if you leave one of the links missing, it will not develop. And so that's why we did, in fact, issue this position paper, so to say, to manifest that the Central Eastern European region and Poland in particular cannot accept such a delegated act.
This is definitely the sector which, can highlight the positives and strength of our economy.
Absolutely.
So let's hope we'll use the full potential of it. Well, thank you very much for the discussion.
Thank you so much for the conversation. It was a great discussion.
My pleasure. Thank you.